Welcome to Roadmaps in Genesis 1, 2, and 3. Here we are in chapter 2, the second chapter of the Bible. As we said in Genesis 1, what we're specifically doing is looking at these three chapters from the perspective of what they tell us about God. We saw in chapter 1 that God is a creator, and of course there's no surprise there. Here in chapter 2, though, I'd like to suggest to you that God is the king. And what does king mean? Because we don't use that language in the same way that they did in the Old Testament. So let's think that through for a minute. God as our king means someone who's involved in our daily lives in a leading and guarding and protecting way. He's our governor, our administrator, our judge. In the Old Testament, to be a king was to be a hands-on ruler for the people's flourishing. In the 20th century and 19th century, 18th century, we're thinking of kings as emperors and empresses over huge territories spanning the world. The sun never set on the British Empire, that kind of stuff. In the Old Testament, city-states would have a king, and that king of that city would be the primary shepherd and judge and administrator for that city-state. And sometimes they'd have broader empires or countries. You think of Solomon as the greatest, the king who reigned over Israel at its greatest extent. But even so, early on in Solomon's reign, there's this fantastic story of him judging the cases that needed to be judged. And there's two prostitutes that come before him because they both had sons, and one of the sons died in the night. And so now there's only one boy between them. And first of all, you're saying, I couldn't imagine a king today adjudicating a case with two prostitutes, but that's what was going on in the Old Testament. When we say God as king, we're meaning that kind of care and individual level and personal involvement in the daily lives of those under his care. That's what Genesis 2 reveals, that there is a God who is creator and sovereign over all, but actually comes near and is involved in the daily life of this world he creates. The chapter of Genesis 2, which really begins at verse 4, is 7 scenes. 3 scenes have to do with the environment humans are in, and 3 scenes have to do with the existence of humans themselves. And then finally, we have the gift of marriage, which is the climactic scene. So, and that's how the chapter lays out. I mean, it's just that simple. The earth is barren in the first couple of verses there, verses 4, 5, and 6. There's no rain, there's no shrubs, there's no humans, and the mists water the earth. Well, nobody knows what that really means. We just know there's no rain, no shrubs, and no humans. It's a world we've lost, we haven't seen. It does kind of remind me in some way of Genesis 1, verse 2, where the earth is formless and void and hasn't been all filled yet, but that's okay. Skip down to verses 8 and 9, and staying above the line of humans' environment, God plants the Garden of Eden. And he's already created the man, and so he places the man in it. And there's 2 trees named there. So all sorts of other trees, but he names 2, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And then verses 10 to 14 are very interesting. The third scene that have to do with human environment is that Eden is actually oriented geographically. And so literally it's placed somewhere. There's 4 named rivers, and it talks about the lands that it's around, and that, there's good gold in that land over there, and so on and so forth. Whatever else all that stuff means, it does not sound like someone is just making up a myth. It sounds like someone is trying to orient people to where something is. Now, the Exodus generation comes out of Egypt, so they know about Cush, which is just to the south of Egypt. It's Ethiopia today. And they know about the Tigris and the Euphrates River and that sort of stuff. And maybe they obviously know about the rest, or God wouldn't name them. The point is, Eden's a real place in a real neighborhood. And that's pretty cool. All 3 of these scenes, verses 4 to 6, 8 and 9, 10 to 14, all 3 of these scenes are inaccessible to us today. The pre-Eden world Eden itself, and even some of these rivers and lands are inaccessible to us. It's a bit of a mystery, but that's okay, because here we are following a God who is greater than us. Well, let's go below the line to look at what God tells us about our existence. God the King who's involved, he, in verse 7, forms the man. So not humanity in general, but the given man, who we know as Adam, and he gets his fingers dirty. God forms him from the dust of the earth, and then he breathes into him the breath of life. And Adam became a living creature. And so Adam is a special creation of God. He's not just the next evolution of an ape or something like that. He is a special creation of God, formed from the dust of the earth, breathed into the breath of life, and he became a living creature. But also, isn't that great? Dust of the earth and the breath of life. Adam already in Genesis 2 is shown to be of two worlds, the earthy and the heavenly, with the breath of life coming from the Lord himself. You skip down to verses 16 and 17, and God puts Adam in the Garden of Eden that he's just created. And he has a job for him to do, to work it and to keep it. And he commands him in verse 16, eat of all the trees you want, except not of that tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And he offers the consequence. In the day you eat of it, you will surely die. God gives to Adam a role, which is to work the garden and keep it, to serve the garden and guard it. And yet there's a limit. The limit is his role is just the garden. God didn't say the whole world. He says, I got a place for you that's going to be good. And there's a limit on what you can and can't do. Yes, 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 yes. No. Yes, 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 yes. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil is off limits. And when you eat of it, I'm telling you what's going to happen. God says, I'll give you my word. On that day you will die. And Adam is in the garden, but things aren't good. He can't perform his job to work it and keep it alone. Interestingly, this is the only time in the pre-sin era that God says that something is not good. It's not good that the man is alone. I'll make a helper suitable for him. And Adam looks at all the animals, and there is no helper suitable. Suitable for what? To complete the vocation call, to work the garden and keep it, to bring culture out of nature. And there's no animal that's going to be able to help him suitably. So God creates the woman. And he doesn't do it from the dust of the earth and the breath of life. He does it from the rib of Adam. And then he brings her and presents her to Adam. And he says, wow, this is amazing. Bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. At last, he says, because he's seen all the animals and they don't work. At last, this is bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. She'll be called woman. She was taken out of man. And then the very last thing that goes on in Genesis 2 is the gift of marriage. Therefore, a man will leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. Now, this is the climactic scene. Yes, there's the environment he's placed us in. Yes, there's the work and the keeping and the vocation in the garden. Yes, he's alone, but God makes a suitable helper. But actually, it goes deeper. God gives the gift of marriage. And here on the second page of the Bible, God defines what marriage is for us. It's a gift from him. It's one man and one woman in lifelong unity and intimacy and priority, relationship above all. Therefore, a man will leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This is not about Adam. Adam didn't have a father and mother to leave. This is God talking to you and me and to every reader all through history. Here's my heart for marriage. It's for all humanity, one man, one woman becoming one flesh. And as Genesis 1 says, so they can be fruitful to multiply, and so that they can work the garden and keep it, and so that they can fill the earth and subdue it. This is what God is doing here in the gift of marriage. Well, God's foundation for human history, God the King who's involved, is set. He's given us a vocation. He's given us complementarity and completion in what it means to be human. Men and women together are needed. And He's given us this gift of marriage, which brings children in most marriages' case. Genesis 2 is undoubtedly a call to you and me to culture. God doesn't want us to flee from the world and society around us. He wants us involved, just like He is, with our existence and our environment, with vocation and help. He wants us to bring fruit and sustenance from the earth around us, to cultivate. That's the root word for culture. From nature to culture. That's where He wants. He wants us to enjoy and participate in the progress of our environment to a better and better flourishing. And the foundational building block of all of culture is marriage. And that's God's intent, His design. This is Genesis 2 in a nutshell. It is God the King involved in our daily affairs, and it is the call to you and me to culture, to participate in this world and this life. We'll see you next time for Genesis 3.